Spider-Man Homecoming. So, I am a huge Spider-Man fan. He's the reason that I even got into comics way back in 2000s. And before that with the animated series, the video games, and the Sam Raimi movies, and now we have the third Spider-Man reboot. Someone needs to stop before this happens again. No, seriously, please stop with the reboots. I want to see where this one actually goes. You've already left me without closure for 2 series now. Don't do this to me again. Or maybe you could finally have these Spider-Man team up, and then I can get closure on those storylines which you cancelled. Spider-Man Homecoming tells the story of Spider-Man, who is essentially a sort of protege to the Avengers, who are more high-profile superheroes. He's not satisfied being your traditional friendly neighborhood Spider-Man hanging out at the street level and wants to get into some more action, basically. Fortunately, action comes knocking in the form of the Vulture, and Spidey sets out to try and stop him. The plot's actually a lot more complicated than that, and a lot deeper than I'm making it sound, but that's the basic gist of it. I want to get the negatives out of the way first, and first things first, and this is a real nitpick of mine, is how the villains look in this. I mean, Vulture looks pretty damn awesome. Definitely an upgrade from an old guy dressed as a bird. But he's shot at night a lot, so it's very hard to make out a lot of details. I do like the furry collar and like the look of the helmet and the glowing eyes and the wings especially, but he could have added a little bit more green on this guy. Seriously, just something to make him pop a little bit more. It's a comic book movie. I think we would understand if you made your villains a little bit brighter. Someone who has got bright colors is the Shocker, though he just kind of wears a padded jacket. Come on, how cool could you make the Shocker look in an MCU film? I don't think it's too much to ask that we have a guy running around dressed in a mattress. But the big negative that I have to say, and this one is actual negative and not a nitpick, is I don't like the action in this film. The parts where Spider-Man swinging around is pretty cool, and there's a couple of neat fight scenes where he's fighting off some villains. I feel like the things that really get to me are the battles against the Vulture. The first one, there's a lot of shaky cam as he's dropped to the ground. It is very disorientating. I just felt like I kind of want this scene to end just so the headache will stop. Oh god, I can't believe Spider-Man's giving me Resident Evil the final chapter flashbacks. And the final fight as well is in the dark with a lot of bright flashing lights which don't illuminate our heroes, it just makes everything kind of disorientating. I really expected a lot better, especially from a Marvel film, and especially from a Spider-Man film, because the bar's been set pretty high by the previous series. Yeah, Spidey's web configurations are a lot of fun to see, but at the same time, they're just not utilized in very good fights. Giving him a proper one-on-one against the Shocker, or, you know, brightening up the Vulture a bit, give us a bit, like, a better shot of that final fight could have really elevated this film. Fortunately, that's the only real negative. The rest of the stuff I actually liked. I'm gonna start mine and work my way up. I really like the tone of this. It's definitely very kind of goofy, and I don't want to say kid kind of tone, but it's definitely a lot brighter than a lot of other superhero films. I mean, you can tell it's supposed to be about a kid, and it definitely reflects that and stands out from a lot of its competitors. I doubt that you're going to confuse the tone of this film with, say, Iron Man. And I also really like the villain. The Vulture, played by Michael Keaton, isn't necessarily like a very deep villain, and we've seen a lot better developed villains, but at the same time there's something to Keaton's performance that actually does elevate this. He's got a lot of charm to him, and he's got a very intimidating presence when he needs to. On top of that, his motives are simplistic, but are actually more unfitting of what you would see with a Spider-Man villain. Spidey's villains are basically high-end bits folks with gimmicks. When you think about like Spidey's greatest villains, Vulture, Rhino, Sandman, these are all people who are just criminals. They're criminals and very dangerous, but at the same time criminals. They're not the kind of guys who would run around and try and take over the world or anything like that, which we've pretty much seen from previous villains. I guess the closer would be Sandman, but his was portrayed as like more out of necessity rather than trying to be a criminal. Vulture's been portrayed as a very hard-working guy. He's like a very working Joe kind of guy, and he just wants to afford a decent life for his family. That part isn't played up, and he isn't as sympathetic, but at the same time he's got a sense of dignity and honor to him. You can tell where he's coming from, and he's a lot of fun to see on screen. On top of that, there's a scene in a car which I'm not going to spoil, but the way the lighting's used and his facial expressions, you can tell that he's having a blast with this. And I also really like the story of this. It's got the same strength that I really liked about The Amazing Spider-Man. It's a film about responsibility. That's Spider-Man's whole point, is great power comes great responsibility. But usually it's not portrayed as being about that. It's like, I'm a superhero who's a supervillain, I gotta stop him. What I'm talking about is a film that is about his core principles and doing the right thing. And yeah, he messes up, but at the same time, he's learning from his mistakes and moving forward. He's someone who wants to help, and that's what the story is ultimately about. It's about learning what that responsibility actually means and having a respect for it, rather than just, I have to fight the bad guy because I'm a superhero. And that leads me to the one thing, the best thing about this film, and that is Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I think this might be the best Spider-Man I've seen on film. Before this, it was Andrew Garfield. Fight me. He captured the intelligence as well as the wit that I come to associate from the character from both the animated series, the video game, and the comics. Tobey Maguire had a couple of those elements, but at the same time, it felt very superficial. He had some great rage moments, which is what Garfield was lacking, but Holland manages to combine both of those elements. I feel like the moment that he really sold me on the character was during the scene where he's on a boat and he's trying to save the people on board. What was his first instinct? Analyzed where the structural strengths of the boat were and tried to put the boat together using his webbing. That's using his intelligence. That's something that the Garfield Spider-Man would do. But when that fails, he jumps in there and tries to pull it using brute strength. That's something the Maguire one would do. He's like the Daywalker of Spider-Man. He's got all the strengths and the weaknesses, but the weaknesses work to his strength. He's irresponsible, again like the Garfield one, and again like the Garfield one, he's learning from his mistakes and moving forward. It definitely isn't as dark as the Amazing movies could get at times. And it kept this tone that we saw in the Raimi films. It was a very happy medium, and I'm so glad that I can say that Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man I've seen so far. I will defend Andrew Garfield's interpretation to the death, but I am willing to admit when someone comes along who is able to take that crown away from him. I'm so happy when I can see someone that shatters my expectations and comes out and makes it their own. He doesn't have the same confidence that you'd see a lot of in the Spider-Man comics or animated shows, movies, games, stuff like that. But at the same time, he's portrayed as a kid, and one of the reasons they chose a kid was because they want him to grow with the character. And I am so excited to see where that goes. I really want to see this character grow and develop, and don't reboot it again. Please, just play this one out. Like two more movies. Maybe he could be in an Avengers film. Just give it a bit more time, okay? Also, I don't care what anybody says. This suit is awesome, bite me. I love it when people take liberties with the Spider-Man design and aren't restricted by it. But this one has the Spider-Man look, and it has its own unique flavor to it. I wish we'd seen more of him inventing his own web configurations, and I don't really like that a lot of his tech was given to him, but at the same time, he does have his own low-tech web shooters and his own low-tech eyepieces, which he made himself. Also, we actually see him making his own web fluid, and he actually does science, which is something that I can't say for Maguire. Think about it. In any of the Raimi films, did Spider-Man actually do any science? I don't mean like saying a couple of science words. I mean like actually being a scientist. I have to watch these films again, but I don't think he does. Also, I love the outfit that he made himself. Incorporating the hoodie with the Spidey logo on it gives me like a very strong Scarlet Spider feel, which I think is what they were going for. I kind of wish that they'd gone all the way with it and made it a blue hoodie and the rest of the outfit was red. But for what it was, it felt like a nice callback. But now I'm just rambling, so I'm gonna go to my final rundown. I didn't like the design of the villains. But I did like the tone, the villain, the story, and our main character. So for me, it's an 8 out of 10. It reminds me a lot of the first Spider-Man film, and it's got a lot of the things that I liked about that. It has the same problem that I had with the first Spider-Man film, is that I felt like the action was kind of lacking. But if Homecoming follows on from its predecessors, hopefully we'll get some awesome action in Spider-Man Homecoming 2. I don't know, it looks like they're going for a subtitle thing. I'm not sure what they're going to call it next one. I had a lot of fun with this movie. I definitely don't think it's the best Spider-Man film or even the best MCU film, but it's humble beginnings for my favorite hero, and I can't wait to see where it goes from here. So check it out. It definitely feels like one of the most fun films I've watched in a while. Take care now. Bye bye then. Don't worry. I won't let them hurt you. I like what I like, okay?